Every 10 years,
Yeah, right.
because the concentration went down. Either you have to have twice as much or something, you know?
Yeah.
All right, folks, let's find our seats.
All right, Jim.
It's time to get going again. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back. Let's get right back into it. Karen, are you ready?
Right,
Let's go.
and I'm going to bring this closer. All right, here we go. So my name is Karen Morrow, and I am the Director of Remediation in D&D Division, Deactivation, Decommissioning. I work for DOE, and before I start the rest of my presentation, I kind of want to give acknowledgments to thank EPA and DHEC for being here as our core team partners, and then we also have SRS, some other SRS folks in the back row there. So if I need to draw a lifeline there, have my people with me. So thank you so much for joining us. Slide, you have acronyms, your package. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about, from a holistic standpoint. I won't get into too much of the technical details like the folks up here, but I want to draw a big picture of what they've talked about and then what DHEC and EPA will talk about and how we do the business of the program. So I'm going to include a little bit of discussion on some elements of system plan that we have, that we've collaborated with our SRS counterpart, area completion projects. We use system plan as a business tool for consideration when planning for remediation and deactivation and decommissioning, especially from a funding standpoint. It helps us understand what our funding needs should be. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we integrate that into a strategy, particularly including the regulatory requirements and site closure. So in terms of our site closure mission, it includes protection of human health and environment and the environment. We try to ensure that we look at it from a holistic standpoint, which includes the remediation portion. So one of the things that we also do is surveillance and maintenance, which is not mentioned here. We'll talk about that in some later slides, but that's part of the mission too. Program drivers or our RECRA and CERCLA. All right, so in terms of our strategy, we take a comprehensive approach. For example, one of the things on our site, for our site missions, you've probably heard of the tank closure, those sorts of things. That's part of our mission in terms of waiting for those sorts of things to happen in order to go forward with D&D, for example. We utilize an area completion framework. It's a holistic framework that includes soil and water contamination where found and deactivation commissioning facility. So it's a cleanup perspective that's all inclusive. We try to ensure we have the necessary funding, and everything is mission dependent. One of the things that we'll get more into is FFA and RECRA requirements on slides coming up, but I did want to highlight for the picture you see here, our scientists here mentoring and some of the interns, and that's one of the things that we like to do for our program is also have our interns, DOE interns, SRS interns learn about the program. So that's the picture you're seeing. In terms of regulatory requirements, we have the FFA, Federal Facility Agreement, and RECRA, CERCLA. The FFA is an integral part of our program, which includes both collective and CERCLA working together to clean up soil and groundwater. Of course, I've mentioned EPA from a core team standpoint, working together to fulfill the FFA. The FFA lists our RECLA, CERCLA waste and other potential releases. It also includes administrative requirements, an enforceable schedule, and milestones for action. So I've talked about the collaborative approach that we have. We utilize DOE principles of environmental restoration, which is our core team process, essentially, how we and it takes into account a strategy for working together, both DOE, DHEC, and EPA, and also our SRS counterpart is integral to that process. They facilitate a lot of the scoping meetings and so forth that we use to collaborate and then come into alignment and make decisions on responses to these particular waste units and how we're going to remediate. Now, the picture you're seeing here is actually one of the things that shows our area closure mission. And so in terms of area closure mission, which I mentioned before, it demonstrates sort of from start to finish of how we perceive our closure mission happening. So FY 2065 is the projection for mission completion. Now, waste unit remediation is an award-winning program. Jeff has mentioned that before with FIDO. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But before I mention that, I want to bring attention to the milestones since 1993. And as of March this year, we have achieved 4,155 milestones completed on or ahead of schedule. Nothing's missed. So we have a successful program. We continue operations and maintenance, which I've mentioned the surveillance and maintenance program. That's still a part of it. We still cut the grass, still make sure, all of the systems are operating as they should be. Then also, I said that I was going to say a little bit more about our awards. Jeff mentioned the FIDO remediation. One of the things, since he's already talked a lot about it already, one of the things I did want to say is that there's a cost savings over pump and treat technology for that particular remediation, and that cost savings is $8 million per year versus traditional pump and treat. As far as the other items, we have lower stream runs, which we've also received a 2022 Secretary of Honor Award. That's because that particular project is the first watershed to reach final cleanup decision, and it is a sustainable remediation that we was awarded for. We've also used drones. We continue to use drones. I believe we're the only DOE complex that uses, DOE site rather, that uses drones for S&M and inspecting of our facility. So now we're on to facility deactivation and decommissioning. Just to note, as you see here, there is no regulatory driver for D&D, meaning we're not required to do so by some legal aspect to accomplish. However, we do have facilities that require D&D captured in our FFA. Before I go on any further though in this, I do want to explain what the life cycle of D&D looks like. So we have a facility that's been constructed, then of course it goes through operations, then from operations, the mission is complete. Upon mission completion, we have facility shut down, then from shutdown, we're deactivating. Now, deactivating it does not necessarily look like, you're decommissioning right after. It may be deactivation for safe storage. And what that means is the facility can stay in a safe condition for a certain length of time before decommissioning. And that means we will still continue surveillance and maintenance. Surveillance and maintenance begins way before deactivation ever starts. So it's even through the operating aspects of the facility. Then from there, we can, from deactivation, we can do decommissioning. And even after decommissioning, we still will have surveillance and maintenance in some aspect of the facility. Now, decommissioning is funding dependent. So we like to have those funds available to us prior to going into that phase of the project. And this brings us to our facility here that's featured. One of the things before that, I want to say that there's two types of in-state for facility D&D. It's demolition and removal and in situ. So in situ is where much of the building's exterior remains. It's in a stable condition. One of the things that is great about in situ is that it reduces risk to the worker and the public versus demolition and having to handle disposal waste from decommissioning. And it reduces costs associated with disposal. In situ is an approach which includes grouting the inside, placing, in this case, an engineered roof. So some DNR may still occur though, as is in the case of 105P. We've had a stack removal and the gantry crane removal, for example. And I'll go to the next slide to show you that information. So you can see the insides routed, and also you can see the stack gone and the gantry crane gone. So here, this is one of the facilities where I think some slides towards the front, you saw a drone flying. This is one of those facilities where we employ drones for inspection and S&M. Next, we have demolition and removal. And this may include removing to slab, removing to not leaving any remnants to the soil, as is in a case of the D area powerhouse facility. So the top portion, you'll see a coal handling system. Facilities on the left there, you'll see they're gone. Right side of the picture where we have just soil remaining. Then we have 485, the cooling towers before D&D. You can see the cooling towers there. And then remaining is remnants, concrete remnants after D&D. All right, progress. So in terms of progress for facility D&D, we have 809 of the 1,126 facilities already, remaining. So we have one total 1,126 identified for completion. That concludes the presentation. We have resources available. If you want to go to those links, there's more information in terms of the DOE principles, the FFA, so forth. Are there any questions?
Okay, we'll start with John.
John Thomas, CAB. The drones you're using for inspection, how often do they find issues with the roof and vegetation, and is that a big issue?
So it would be a big issue if we just let it grow, but we don't. So every time they are inspecting, they're looking for those particular any vegetation. The drones, I believe they fly too, but at least one of the drones is outfitted with some treatment, like a herbicide, that sort of thing, where it can treat that particular vegetation.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Harley over here.
Good morning. Good morning, Nate Hartley, CAB. That whole facility is encased in concrete, but doesn't over a period of time concrete swells?
So you're asking, how do we deal with, the concrete degradation?
Yes, I think it's over a period of time concrete will swell. And how long? Well, that's one question. I'll ask that one and then the next one.
Okay. So I'll defer to what Mr. Holcomb on the technology they're using for that purpose.
They'll turn it on for you. Is that good?
Hello, hello.
Sorry, we're phoning a friend.
Yeah, good. Can everybody hear me? Kelsey Holcomb, I'm with SRS. The P reactor roof is an engineered roof. If you look at that picture, all the main process areas were reinforced. It's an engineering assessment where those roofs last thousands of years, and that's one of the primary drivers to treat the wooded vegetation is to prevent rainwater intrusion. Only the below grade areas of the reactor are grouted, not the entire facility. We do inspect it annually, and going back to your question, with the use of the drones, we do find, we used to use aerial footage, so this picture here was actually taken from a helicopter. The drone can get within feet of the complex, so we get higher resolution, higher quality inspections using the UAV system. We don't see swelling of grout, and we monitor that on an annual basis. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. My other question is, how long will that concrete last?
We don't expect it to last forever. It's going to be an iterative process. So as we see repairs that are needed, we'll have to make those repairs. But the current estimate is in the thousands of years.
How many?
Thousands.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions from around the table? Okay.
Hello, it's Charlie Shofitiya, SRS CAB. I thought it's very impressive, all of the sustainability and the awards that you guys have around your project completion. I think you mentioned just being ahead achieving many major milestones ahead of time. Like you mentioned, you guys like leverage is, I believe you mentioned leveraging technology for efficiency and for a lot of your decision making. You know, previously we recommended the implementation of a proprietary DOE-owned AI machine learning decision-making system to help, I guess, make other operations for decommissioning sites like more efficient. I'm just curious, first start off as a statement, but I'm also curious if you could share a little bit more about some of the technologies that you guys have been using to enhance your efficiency and kind of your thoughts on if you believe that you could leverage AI machine learning as well.
Okay, so that sounds like a twofold question, but I'll answer the AI one first. I do remember that recommendation. So in terms of AI, I believe it's being explored. I don't know that we've come to a final decision on that. However, from a decommissioning standpoint, we would have to sort of feed the system. That makes sense.
Yes.
And we pretty much know what our end states are for our facilities. So we have that information already available. I'm not sure what AI would add to that specifically, but we'd be open to other recommendations if you all should have that, if you have some insight on what you think that could be. In terms of other technologies, new technologies, I don't know, Kelsey, are y'all exploring anything else besides what we've mentioned?
Yeah, we're always looking for new ways to perform remediation or demolition. So actually, Mr. Budney had mentioned earlier working with SRNL on detritiating water. We have a very close relationship with SRNL. We talk to them nearly daily. We are actually, Jeff over here is helping us out. We're leading the way for LiDAR. So we can hook up, we call it a puck, a sensing system to the bottom of our UAV systems so we can get more accurate measurements for subsidence in our waste units and our waste caps. So again, improving the quality of our inspections and our long-term stewardship of the site. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Phyllis.
Phyllis Britt Cab. I was just curious. I don't quite know where the demarcation lies. On slide 8, it says over 4,100 consecutive milestones completed since 1993. Current completion projected in 2065. How does that jive with what SRMC is promising with mission completion in 2035, 2037, whatever it is?
Okay, I think I understand your question. In terms of, so our mission is based on other missions being complete. So their input is, well, their output is our input, I would say. So when they're complete, say, and I'm giving that 2037 number, we take that into account. So those facilities would then start shutting down. And when they start shutting down, deactivating and so forth, then we are on a trajectory to finish in terms of D&D, looking at any cleanup from, say, groundwater, if that ends up being a problem, or soil, if that ends up being a problem. So in terms of FY 2065, that's our number, holistic number, what we've projected in terms of when facilities will be complete with their mission.
So what are they completing? I'm confused. I thought everything was going to be cleanup and all that stuff was going to be finished in 2037. I don't understand.
Okay, so we have different missions. SRMC is a separate mission from the cleanup, the soil and groundwater cleanup mission, ND&D mission. So their mission is separate. So their mission is a 2037 mission. The soil and water ND&D mission takes that into account and executes separately from their mission.
Okay, I understand what you're saying, but I still don't understand, what are they completing then? If they're going to be complete in 2037, what's complete?
Okay. So, for example, tank closures. We don't have, our mission is not tanks, for example. Their mission is tank closure, liquid waste, those types of things.
Yeah, Phyllis, Mike Bunny, DOE. So essentially, SRMC will remove the real environmental risk by removing all the radioactive material, filling the tanks with grout, operations and closing the tanks, right? But then if you were to look at the tank farm, it would still look like a tank farm basically, except there's a little more concrete down there than there was before, and some of the pipes are disconnected. Then the question is, what do we do with that facility afterwards? Do we cover it? And the same thing for the saltstone disposal units, when they get filled with grout, right? They're sitting there, big tank above ground, sitting there. So what do we do with those afterwards? You know, conceptually, we may cover them all with topsoil and create a new hill out there. We may have to create a new lake to get all the topsoil to cover them. But so there is a mission for Karen's group after all the risk is actually removed, to put the site in whatever configuration we're going to leave it in permanently.
Okay, yeah, now I get it. I think so. Thank you. I appreciate it, both of you.
Okay. Anything else for Karen? You on the fence, Candace?
I'll go ahead, James. Candace Cave Cab. So how does the NNSA mission impact your 2065 projection?
Okay, so NNSA is separate from EM, and their mission is ongoing. The EM mission is, from our standpoint, is specifically for closure.
So are we not expecting NNSA to produce something, some type of waste and things that need to be cleaned up?
Right, so they will take care of that. Yeah.
Yeah, Candace, we learned a lot from what we've done in the past. And so when we create new facilities now, they're required to have the cleanup sorted out as part of that development project. So,
Kim?
Kim Ray Cab. Good morning. Thank you for being here. On one of your slides, you said that there is no regulatory driver for D&D. And if everything else has a regulatory driver, how does D&D not have a regulatory driver for what they're operating?
So a lot of the regulatory aspects that we've talked about already, when we talk about regulatory drivers, we have, for example, cleaning up the groundwater. We have to clean up to certain standards, like MCLs. Well, D&D doesn't have any regulatory aspects that drive them to clean up to a certain point from that perspective. In other words, we don't necessarily have to demolition a facility or remove it. I mean, we could let it sit there. We could, acquire another mission to where we're going to use that facility, which those kind of things have happened where someone said, hey, we want to use this facility for something else. So there's nothing that drives us to do demolition for a facility.
Okay. I understand you don't have to do demolition on it, but say P reactor.
Right.
If it's not in operation anymore, and is there nothing requiring that something be done to put it in a safe state?
So we can have a facility in a safe state without actually, remember when I talked about deactivation, I'm sorry. So deactivation is one of those aspects where we can put a facility in a safe condition. So for safe storage without actually going a step further to decommissioning.
There's no regulation that says you have to.
No.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from around the table? Oh, Candace.
So with that being said, is that why D&D seems to not have a very large budget compared to some of the other line items in the budget?
Well, I will say that question is sort of, I can't say yes or no, really, but here's what I would say. What we like to do is when we know a facility is going to be shut down, going to deactivation, decommissioning, we like to go ahead and plan for decommissioning to happen. So we try to line, that's one of the reasons for this system integration and planning and all that, is we try to have it lined up to where we will have funding in place. If you go back to the first slide, where we have 235F, we're actually preparing for that now. And so we're lining up funding because we know that we're going to decommission this facility. So we've already received certain funds for the planning aspects, but we know come FY27, we want to be in the field already doing work to establish completion of this facility. And so we are already planning for that process.
Okay. Any other questions from around the table? Seeing none. Amy, what do you think? I tell you what, folks. Yeah, so here's the question, is we probably got another hour's worth of presentation and Q&A left, just judging by the pace at which we've been moving. You want to take lunch now, come back at 1:20, or do you want to do this and wait another hour? Or not wait another hour, but get through these next ones and then break. What do you folks want to do? Keep going? Keep going it is then. That's the loudest voice I heard. I didn't hear any dissent. Everybody spoke. They had cake and we're good to go. Awesome. I love it. So, John, you ready? Let's get EPA's perspective on all this.
Yeah, that puts a lot of pressure on Susan and I, think. Yes, John Richards with EPA again. And again, this will be an overview, and thanks to, I won't have to go through too much detail on the fund process, because mostly what I'll be covering is how we're applying Superfund at Savannah River site. So again, the headline there, that's what EPA does for every site. Savannah River is no different than any other Superfund site in terms of our goal. But at SRS, we are the federal regulator over the cleanup of hazardous waste sites. But DOE, and I'll get to this more later, is the lead. It'll be the federal lead for the cleanup, where we and South Carolina, co-regulator, help get things cleaned up. This is our list of our project managers, and some of you met Jenna and Brianne before. They've been at the CAB previous months and be in the future ones. At any given time, we've had up to 6 individual that's remedial project managers. That's what the term is for the Superfund project manager. And I being the lead, like Susan and Avery, we obviously have a team under us. And our team you see there with my other project managers, our technical support, that includes our contractor that does a lot of our work, and our own in-house hydro, risk assessors, et cetera. And then every Superfund site, no matter how small, how big, has a community involvement leader. And again, with a federal facility site as large as DOE, they don't get as much involved as they would, for example, at a private site where maybe just one or two operable units and a lot of public engagement. And that kind of goes back to why do we have this many people on this project? Because a typical Superfund site, there's over 1,200, is usually one project manager. And again, might have a whole technical team behind and et cetera. But obviously very large sites, especially Department of Energy sites and a few DOD sites, it's not unusual to have multiple project managers because of all the work. Yeah, this just goes on that includes the rest of our team support. So the hydro, risk assessors, radiation, myself, and then we all have a designated attorney for every Superfund site, usually a group of sites. They work together, and our contractor that does a lot. So as part of this talk is kind of introducing Superfund. So I mean, might not be familiar with Superfund and how we again apply that at SRS. So, yeah, EPA, founded in 1970, we don't write the laws. We don't write the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, RCRA, CERCLA. That's all written by Congress. We have to write regulations to implement these laws or obviously enforce the regulations and then set national standards. And this is just how EPA and a lot of federal agencies are divided across the U.S., where headquarters are in D.C., so whether it's EPA or maybe Department of Labor or others, FEMA, are all broken up and like this. Other ones that are smaller, like Nuclear Regulatory Commission, there's only 5 regions. Obviously, DOE sites are broken up where their actual sites are. So when did the CERCLA start? Again, it became law in 1980. A lot of the actual how we implement CERCLA, Superfund, didn't come until the amendments in 1986. And that's not uncommon because, again, you write a law and then you got to figure out how we're going to implement it at all these sites. But like I said, a lot of the laws, acts we have with EPA are reactive law. They're addressing previously contaminated sites, in this case of CERCLA. The bottom one, I turned on the PBS a couple weeks ago. I had recorded a show that was talking about the history of Love Canal. I don't know if it was the 50th anniversary or what. It was so dramatic, even with the footage of 40 or 50 years ago, and so disturbing. I couldn't even watch the whole video, but that's one of the reasons that site, Valley, the Drums, and others, why Congress said, we got to do something. We got to do something to address these sites that are abandoned. So maybe CERCLA is written primarily to address sites where somebody goes bankrupt, they leave a bunch of hazardous drums behind, contaminate the soil and groundwater, but obviously it's gotten much bigger than that, but that was the primary purpose. Yeah, so it provides authority for the federal government to respond to any releases or threatened releases of hazardous substances. And then we refer to the National Contingency Plan. That's the implementation rules of Superfund. That's what we call the NCP, the National Contingency Plan. So again, procedures for conducting CERCLA response actions, establish the risk level that triggers cleanup action. You may have heard of the 1 in 10,000, 1 in a million risk. That all came from this original, I think in the 1980 CERCLA Act. But it was not until 1987, Congress did executive order, or president, that delegates where the federal agency is the lead for Superfund cleanup. So obviously that's DOE, in this case DOD, individual Air Force, Navy, those sites, where they are responsible for implementing the certain provisions of CERCLA. So again, makes them the lead agency. Federal facilities must, again, follow all the policies, procedures spelled out in the National Contingency Plan. They still have to follow this just like a private site would. And then at the end of the day, and I'll get to more of this in more detail, but EPA concurs with the remedies proposed by the lead agency or picks another appropriate remedy. And usually you'll see with Savannah River, we have not had that not had to use that authority. So again, the federal facilities, DOE, DOD, NASA has their own CERCLA site as well in Alabama, subject to CERCLA requirements similar to private entities, as I mentioned. And this just shows you in our region all the different sites. Again, I mentioned over 1,000 Superfund sites nationwide, but there's maybe 60 to 70 that are we call Superfund sites with radiation on them, and obviously a lot of those are the large Department of Energy sites. So the number of sites it can fool you. It's really the size of some of those sites that's the importance. Again, going back to why we have multiple project managers working at Savannah River and Oak Ridge and Paducah and Pinellas, of course, is closed. I think that one closed in the mid-90s, where they used to do the tritium. So when was Savannah River added to what they call the National Priority List in 1989? I think that was common across the DOE complex. Not every DOE site became Superfund. A lot like Portsmouth, that was a gas diffusion plant, stayed under RCRA, but its sister plant, Paducah, which I've worked at a lot, went under CERCLA. So I can't explain why one was there and one not the other. But that meant Savannah River was required to have a federal facilities agreement with the state and EPA. Again, as Karen mentioned a lot, how we work through different priorities and what site we're going to work on was set in that federal facility agreement. And I mentioned before, so the federal statutes for cleanup at federal facilities, you've heard about all the permits. Well, obviously the state has wastewater permit, hollow waste tanks, that's the primary one. But we still have a CERCLA role with that. They had a lot of RCRA units, as you heard Jeff go through a lot of those in groundwater, where the state's the lead because of the RCRA program, but eventually, to whatever the end of the CERCLA is for Savannah River site, they'll come under Superfund, and either the remedies will just say it's already been complete because of the state RCRA action, or maybe something else has to be done. It all has to be assessed at some point in a final, we call record decision. I'll explain those later. But all of these acts are part of what we look at, maybe not as much Oil Pollution Control Act, but the other ones especially. So when you brought up the example of the drinking water limits, we call the term, I'm not going to go through this a lot, but ARARs are applicable or relevant appropriate regulations. So drinking water is a perfect example. It's not applicable anywhere. Any place where there's a Superfund site that the state has declared waters of the state, and that in almost every case groundwater is, I'm sure there's a few places it's not, that means it's relevant and appropriate to apply the drinking water levels, because obviously the only applicable thing is a portable water supply wherever those are, but we're not addressing those. We're addressing a Superfund site with contaminated contaminants in the groundwater, so they have to be, the criteria there is the drinking water levels, if you heard the term MCLs. So this three-party agreement, that's again DOE, the lead, EPA, and the state, in this case South Carolina, so it means at Oak Ridge it's DOE, EPA, and Tennessee, governs, and these are the 6 main things, so everything kind of falls under these big categories there. I'll read those, but like the fourth one, enforceable milestones, that was one of the things that set, so that means on a 2 to 3 year plan, that's where Department of Energy as the lead agency has to get the money for sites that we all agree on. They're setting the priority. The state, EPA are either agreeing or saying, no, we prefer maybe this as being the higher priority. That's usually worked out before, but they're in charge of getting the money, and then 2 or 3 year window where we set milestones. And it's been pretty rare at all the DOE sites. There's been a few where milestones have been missed and there's been penalties assessed. But usually there's mutual agreement when we have to extend, for whatever reason it might be, a milestone. And again, that's part of working together. So I'll get to that in the core team in a minute. So EPA's role, again, we're oversight of remedial activities at Savannah River. Again, we're making sure everything's per CERCLA, per the National Contingency Plan, per the Federal Facility Agreement. That means for Savannah River site, how we're applying Superfund at Savannah River site is that FFA. Again, with technical, procedural assistance, information, guidance, training. The next few slides, obviously we're not the lead agency. This was really just showing you, as I do this talk a lot for the TREAT and other environmental groups, Savannah River. to get an idea that this is what's going on in these investigations, where EPA is not obviously doing this, the lead agency and their contractor are doing this. And we may, at some point, the state may do split samples, for example, of an investigation or EPA. But this is kind of, I'm going to run through a few slides here. This kind of show you what typically happen, what we're trying to address. The typical pathways we're looking at, whether it's an on-site worker, a future residential worker, all that has to be assessed and all the different pathways in a complete comprehensive risk assessment. Again, these are just pictures kind of showing the different ways, again, that you can be, in this case, radiation releases can be exposed. So EPA's role, again, EPA and the state concurrence is required. We're working together to select remedies where the ultimate decision goes in what's called a record of decision. And you could have interim record of decisions. Sometimes it's not the final one. Sometimes we want to get to some early actions, which we've done a lot of that at Savannah River, knowing that we don't really have a final record of action for this given area that may come 10 or 20 years later when everything at that particular site has been addressed, or groundwater, for example. So again, implement remedies, operate them, determine success of remedies. Determining success of remedies, I'll mention later, is what we call our 5-year review. That means every Superfund site, once a remedy has been considered complete, they do 5-year reviews. That means every 5 years you got to look at whether they've left up signs, whether they've got, sometimes you can have ongoing groundwater treatment that's working. In other words, everything's working successful. They check in monitoring, making sure trends aren't going up in any, like groundwater, surface water. All that's part of determining success of the remedies that are chosen. So again, involvement early and often, that means in getting involved. And that's, again, what we talk about in our core team process. So yes, the EPA project manager, remedial project manager, is involved in the scoping. So scoping is one of the big things that's been a very good success, I would say, in the last 24 plus years at Savannah River site. And Susan knows, because she's been one of the ones that done a training for this, as well as my predecessor, Rob Pope, Avery's predecessor, Brian Hennessy. Like a waste management symposium, they gave a whole talk on what the core team process is, how we do scoping at Savannah River site. When many Superfund sites do not work as well as we do, they have constant disputes, et cetera, and again, could be various reasons. But I think Savannah River site has shown there's a way to work through even the most difficult situations. I bring up the example of the peak groundwater that Jeff mentioned. The technology or the treatment, you show that wasn't the first choice for EPA and I think the state. I think we had preferred another option, but it turned out after several scoping meetings, going through a lot of different technical meetings, that it came to the conclusion, well, we can do the one that DOE had proposed now, the one that you saw, and with the money that's there, or we can go to all these disputes to try to get exactly what we wanted. And we realized we compromised with our scoping meeting to, okay, let's do this now and decide if we need the further remedy later. So that's an example, a very difficult groundwater treatment option for P area that we were able to work through with our core team process. The other sites, Matt has had to stop work. We're not going to do any more until our attorneys all work it out. Our headquarters figures it out for us, and we know that usually it's not very successful in getting sites cleaned up, and that's where Savannah River site has been able to do that more than a lot of other sites. So again, all that scoping, you see everything there that's involved in that, and then lots and lots of meetings, sometimes many meetings to determine how we're going to address things. So our management level, especially considering proposed remedies, whenever we have a site that's already considered some options, we not only have a Region 4, we call a remedy review board, it also involves some of our headquarters people that look at remedies across Superfund sites, whether it be a big DOE site like Savannah River, Oak Ridge, or a small little private site that may have even as much of a groundwater problem as Savannah River. In other words, we're trying to make sure we have consistent approaches when we're trying to address these Superfund sites of either applying ARARs, applying different guidance, et cetera. Yeah, so when we get to the Superfund Division Director, again, the proposed plan, that's the one that the public would see and goes to a public meeting, either here or other places, again, issued to the public, in this case by the lead agency, Department of Energy, even though it's already been approved by EPA and the state. Where DOE actually writes this record decision. For example, if we're the lead, we call them fund lead sites. That's a lot of private sites. That's where Superfund kind of got its name, of providing the money when there's no company left to provide any money. Those are truly the abandoned sites where we have to write all of these documents and get them approved. But in this case, the lead agency is doing all of that. Again, with the core team participation, nothing's going to be new that we don't know about once we get to this level. And again, you see there where DOE would sign it, the state signs it, and then actually EPA is the final signature of any record decision. Yeah, so again, this assuring the remedy, again, you see really the three big ones there at the top. But as I mentioned before, one of the keys to saying, okay, we think we made a great decision in 2005 on this remedy, but every 5 years we're going to look at it again to make sure things are working like they should. Maybe it turns out the PE groundwater isn't doing everything Jeff is hoping. That'll be caught in a 5-year review, or hopefully earlier. But that's why those are there, because we want to make sure the remedies are working in place, or making sure the signs are still there. And again, a large site like this, that may not be as a big a deal as a private site, but again, that's what's in place. And again, if there's new emerging contaminants that sometimes have to be addressed. I brought up PFAS yesterday. That's obviously is one of the big contaminants now that has its own drinking water level. So it has to be addressed at a lot of sites that weren't originally looking at that. DOD has a lot more sites that they're addressing that on. Again, I mentioned in D area, we have a large PFAS plume that we've already done some initial data. We're doing some additional data, and now we have an option, a criteria to compare it against once we decide what we're going to do as a core team. So yeah, these decision documents, we say they belong to the Department of Energy, the state, and EPA, again, because we've all agreed to what they are, agreed to what they're going to do. And again, and the EPA's final role is signing the ROD to it to be final per the requirements of the NCP. But like I said, it's a teamwork approach that we've employed, especially at Savannah River, that's helped us get to a lot of success, a lot of difficult sites at Savannah River. Again, the core team is usually, there could be as many people in this room, not usually not that many, might be 3 or 4 from EPA, 5 or 6 from the state, 8 or 10 from DOE and their contractor. But again, we usually have one person that's designated as the core team lead that would make a decision how we agree to go ahead in the scoping or agree to pursue this remedy, et cetera, or data gaps, for example. Yeah, and again, it requires dedication and commitment from each of the 3 parties for this to be a success. These are just showing you the many areas. Some of you know a lot of these areas that have been addressed before. I'm going to run through an example of the lower 3 runs, but it just shows you maybe some of these areas where maybe the main contaminant, like Jeff's P area, the groundwater is the main contaminant there, D area, coal ash and groundwater. Now groundwater would also be the PFAS, not just volatile organics and tritium. So I'm going to run through quickly because I know we don't have a lot of time, but I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this anyway. But if you have questions, we'll come back. But I wanted to show an example. Rob Pope, before he moved on to some of other sites, this was one of his last big projects. Lower 3 runs has been one of these that's had major actions going on. I won't go. Yeah, this is kind of going the general slide of Superfund at Savannah River site. And again, the lower 3 runoff unit is the southeast portion of the site. And again, because it was so big, it actually was divided into 3 portions going back to 1995. Yeah, 6 watersheds. The first final record decision on any we call integrator operable unit. And that's really showing you the color didn't come through there on the slide, but there's different watersheds they had nice colors on my slide, but showed the different ones. But we're out dealing with the one with a little tail in the far southeast corner. That's the lower 3 runs. Again, maybe you're not that familiar with lower 3 runs. Just kind of showing you the history of this watershed. So yeah, so this affected areas coming from P area reactor and R area reactor. That's why it was such a huge thing to undergo, because trying to address the sources and the downstream contamination was obviously the goal. So this lower 3 runs interoperable units divided into 3 subunits I mentioned, the upper, middle, and lower. Lower was the highest priority because that was the one that was down in that leg that's easily accessible to the public, whereas the middle and upper are all on SRS property and obviously less priority for where the on-site workers are usually the highest receptor there. So this last record decision, last of the 3 lower 3 runs, focus on this upper portion that kind of gives you the size, where power pond is right in the middle there. The canal systems from P and R reactor, that are all part of that. And this shows you the tail again and up to the power pond. So again, you see on the right, all that's contained, the R reactor, the P reactor, the power pond, the canals. And again, you have to remember, the lower 3 runs to consider waters of the state. So that means that would help apply what relevant appropriate requirements have to be used. So yeah, like I mentioned, this one goes all the way back to 1995. 2 years, that means this was high priority. 2 years after the Federal Facility Agreement was signed, this was one of the first big record decisions. And you see I, that means interim. That means they had other things to get included in the lower 3 runs, so that's why it's interim. But I had to specify water levels. There's a lot of contaminated cesium-137 from past releases of P reactor, I think. That's in the sediments. That's the nature of cesium. It kind of sticks to the sediments. So by keeping power pond covered with water, it greatly reduced, almost completely reduced any exposure to on-site workers around the power pond area. Again, there you see that, looking at the trespasser scenario, somebody that might get on the site like they shouldn't, they won't be exposed. And then you see there that decision was made for engineering, institutional controls, and land use controls, that's another acronym, are added to the tail section stream after the dam. So the record decision, this one involves the upper unit above power pond dam. And that's, you see all the different exposure units on the bottom left is divided in, because each one of those could be evaluated separately because of the size of this area. And then your first thing is called the remedial investigation. So obviously this site has been monitored, sampled many times over the years. So what happens in a remedial investigation, you usually look at historical sampling first, and then you decide if there's data gaps and you need some more current samples to see what's going on. So there you give an idea of over 100 surface water samples were collected. Obviously that would be needed. Fish tissue samples. And the word COC, that just means contaminants of concern. There's sometimes a list of, let's say 20 or 30 or 50 potential contaminants concern. Could be some chemicals, could be radionuclides, and then you find out through the scenario, whatever the receptor is, on-site worker, trespasser scenario, recreational scenario, in this case, which contaminants are going to drive the risk or over any part of our risk range. And it turned out it just came down to 2 radionuclides. I think, yeah, I'm sorry, mercury is going to be coming up later, but for this one, in the upper, one of these lower 3 runs. Oh yeah, I see mercury in the fish tissue, sorry. So this is to identify the on-site worker conceptual site model. That's what's kind of looking at what receptor, potential receptor in the future we're protecting it against, where's the sources coming from, sediment, and it's the main source for the, in this case, the cesium and the cobalt, and who's the receptor, the on-site worker. And then for the fish tissue with cesium and mercury, again, you have sediment, and you have the different fish that are included, mostly the mercury and a little bit of the cesium in the fish tissue. And then you go through what we call remedial action objectives. That's where you're identifying, okay, we have the contaminants of concern, so it's down to 3, and we got to, what do we have to do to make sure that they're not go over those limits? So there you see in the first one, conservative assumption that on-site workers will come into direct contact with the sediment. So that's You have to protect against that. And then the second one with the fish, conservative assumption that recreational fisher person will gain access to the site and catch and ingest fish. And again, that's where they might be exposed to the mercury or the cesium. So these are very busy slides, but just focus on the bold. That's when we're running through any of these Superfund sites. We normally have at least 3 alternatives, and the first one's always no action. In Superfund, you always evaluate, if you don't do anything, what's the risk? If we don't do anything more, then we've done all this investigation, and it turns out that's actually happened where there's actually no contamination found and go to no action. But, you know, in this case, we look at, I think, five or six different ones. So you see there A2, the monitor natural recovery, land use controls, in situ capping, and the PTSM, that means principal threat source material. Remember I mentioned EPA's risk range is 1 in 10,000 to 1 in a million risk. So if something's above 1 in 1,000 risk, 10 to the minus 3 risk, that could be a principal threat source material that we usually has a more, I guess, purpose is there to do something more than just maybe just land use controls. So again, there's a couple more: excavation, and almost everything if there's a chance, excavation is at least so see why, like even the tanks, why would we not excavate an entire tank? Worker exposure, et cetera. Same thing here, even if it's just talking about sediments and soil. And again, maintaining water of the ponds was an important part of this remedy because, again, exposing the sediments with the Season 137 would be the highest risk to on-site workers or trespassers. So then you put together this summary of remedial goals. That's what's in the table. So again, a busy table, but you have the media on the left, the sediment, the soil, the fish tissue, and then your remedial contaminant concern. So there's the cesium, the cobalt for sediment and soil, and then there's the cesium and the mercury on the left for the fish tissue. And there's, again, the units that we use for those. And then you're kind of at the top looking at all these different receptors, the on-site worker, recreational fisherman, and then you're looking at, well, what's the site area background? Almost all contaminants have some kind of background. Savannah River site certainly does for cesium, cobalt, mercury. So sometimes that can be easily identified, sometimes not. So let's just kind of give you a quick look at what we're looking at, what we're trying to address, in this case, below the table, the on-site worker scenario and the hypothetical recreational fisherman scenario that turned out to be the two we're determining everything against. So this one, you don't worry about looking at the entire slide, but it's really just looking at, you got your alternatives across the top. That's the different alternatives we're evaluating. And then on the left, and the big highlights, are what the 9 criteria that's required in Superfund for any remedy, no matter how small your site is or how big it is, like Savannah River site. So overall protection of human health, compliance with the ARARs, that means the criteria you have to meet. Long-term effectiveness, and there's also one for short-term, reduction of toxicity and volume. Yeah, there's a short-term effectiveness, implementation. And yes, cost is one of those 9 criteria as well. We can't just implement the most effective remedy if it's 10 times the cost. And so each one of those has to be evaluated. That's what the DOE and its contractors have put together that we agree on eventually to get to a proposed plan and the record decision. So in this case, they went through the exposure area, all of those different little exposure units that made up this entire lower 3 runs upper region. And you assess those against some of the alternatives on the right and which ones meet those. For example, that A2, that's monitored natural recovery and the land use controls, where some of those don't qualify. And then they have the preferred alternatives. That's usually first addressed by the lead agency, obviously in this case DOE. Again, it's not a surprise to the state and EPA because we've had scoping meetings, we've had other meetings to decide which ones we're going to agree to and which ones we prefer to keep going forward. So this came up with, these are the final ones for the different units. The land use controls would monitor natural recovery, preferred alternative for the entire region. That's the EUs 1 through 9. And then the The discharge canal, you see that one, excavation of a very small area that had that principal threat source material. We realized it was easier and cost effective just to take that out. And then the maintained water in the ponds was an important part. And there you see the total cost of that remedy, $23 million. That gives you kind of a very quick run through of because this is actually the kind of presentation that's given to our Region 4 remedy team where they can evaluate this, our managers, our attorneys, our headquarters, evaluate it against, well, okay, you want to do this site, but this other site, we did it this way. We do that kind of a comparison or consistency. And again, the cleanup at SRS, we know it's going to take a long time. We've been here a long time. I've worked on the site for over 35 years, not to give my age. I will hope to work here as long as I'm still with EPA. And again, it's been very successful, and we've had a lot of great people before me, project managers, lead project managers that have gotten to where we are and working together with Savannah River and the state. There's our information. Any questions?
We'll start with Pat.
Pat Kilroy, I've got just one question. It's outside your boundary, but since the EPA has been working here and in this area, have there been any environmental changes external to outside SRS gates?
Outside of Savannah River?
Yes.
And we had a very large, unfortunate release of chlorine that was maybe, 20 miles to the northwest that didn't affect Savannah River site, but obviously that took a very large EPA state presence. Well, when I think you were mentioning hurricanes before, some of the hurricanes that did have this in the area, I think Irma was one of the last ones where we had people really come into almost every Superfund site that could be affected by that hurricane to assess the flooding potential of those sites. So obviously, a lot of those are in Beaufort area, et cetera. But hurricanes are definitely one of those that we look at that could affect Savannah River or sites around Savannah River.
One of the things I was thinking, just on the areas outside of here, is there a cumulative effect of just things going on? Because we talk about the things that, it becomes less and less. Radioactive stuff decays and everything, but it moves on. What effect is this having outside the boundaries of SRS?
One of the programs I used to do a lot more before Superfund in the 90s was the Clean Air Act, what's called the NESHAPs, that covers everything from benzene to vinyl chloride or radionuclides. And that's applied at the site, not at the site boundary, but obviously Savannah River is huge. Oak Ridge might be a better example where they had an incinerator that did a radioactive thing. They had a nuclear plant downstream where the combination of all those would be under what we call a general dose protectiveness. But DOE has to meet that in that case 10 millirem. We're still within our risk range of the nearest school, business, or home. And of course, if they have a daycare on site, it's got to be there. So all sites have to do that. Like, for example, Barnwell is one of our original 6 low-level waste radioactive disposal areas in northeast corner. They have a tritium plume that's going to have to be addressed at some point, that's coming on to a property of the Savannah River site that's been not affected by Savannah River operations. So there's an example where you have another nuclear facility around that theoretically somebody from the public could be exposed to that facility, but right now no one's drinking that water. They're not. And again, nothing's, as mentioned before, Jeff and others, no groundwater plume that's gotten outside of Savannah River, maybe because of its huge size and Savannah River itself. But I'm not aware of any. Again, EPA's been involved in lots of different programs, obviously making sure Savannah River meets its compliance. The example of the difference is Paducah. We realized in 1989 we had a TCE and a Technetium 99 plume that was going off site undetected. Luckily, it wasn't that many residents, less than 10, but it still required addressing that site completely. That may be why Paducah's on the Superfund list and Portsmouth, its sister plant, is not. But they immediately had to get a water treatment system in place to make sure the TC and the Technip 99 were below drinking water levels anywhere close to those houses and provided public water supply. But luckily, haven't been many DOE sites where that's happened.
Thank you.
Okay. And John?
John Thomas, Cab. I may have missed it. What's Blackwater?
Oh, that was on my slide on the.
Yeah, Blackwater.
Yeah, I'm going to let Jeff answer that one. Blackwater? Don't know what Blackwater.
I had to look it up a second ago, John, while they were talking. It's a slowly moving body of water through like swamps and wetlands.
Slowly moving. And then you also had RG. What are RG?
Oh, remedial goals. Sorry, that's a lot of those terms that are common in Superfund, even among Superfund people. But yeah, so there's remedial goals, remedial action, objectives, and that usually has to do with what criteria we are applying at the site and who we're protecting against. We're not protecting against every receptor. Depends on the individual site.
Okay, thanks. And then what are we doing about the cesium sediment?
Cesium and sediments, again, unfortunately doesn't have a short half-life. Shortest half-life is tritium, 12 years, is 30 years. We've gone through almost 3 half-lives of Cesium-137. So a lot of the areas have actually been addressed, like in the lower 3 runs. I think they did excavate some areas in that lower part of the tail because that was much more closer to the public. Some of the higher areas of sediment were excavated. For the most part, like Parr Pond, there's no really receptor there, not anticipated to be released to the public. That takes away most of the danger, and just keeping the water there is the shielding that protects against. And there's almost no eco effect for aquatic or terrestrial organisms from radionuclides like there are for other chemicals. In other words, the levels that would take to get to that level, all the humans would be dead in the whole area before the animals would, for cesium, for example.
Right. Thank you.
And Don?
Don Colson, materials. What was the source of the mercury contamination? Natural or one of the processes?
I don't know if somebody else Susan may know. I don't know if it was, I don't think there's any operations to Bend River that caused all the mercury in that water system. I don't know if it was atmospheric fallout. Maybe DOE knows that got into the fish. Coal ash. Oh, yes.
Anything else? Pat, did you have any other follow-ups? Okay. Anything else from around the table? Seeing none. Susan, you're up.
All right, everybody doing okay? It's been a long morning. All right, I think I'll kind of synthesize a lot of what you've already heard today. A reminder, I'm Susan Fulmer, and I'm North Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control, and I'm the Federal Facility Agreement Manager for the state of South Carolina. I also manage the Federal Remediation Section at DHEC, and that is the group that oversees all of the NPL sites in the state. As John mentioned, SRS is one of the NPL sites that we have in our section. So we have about half of our section that's devoted just to SRS, and then the other half of my section is dealing with other NPL sites throughout the state. So DHEC's vision is healthy people living in healthy communities, and our mission is to improve the quality of life for all South Carolinians by protecting and promoting the health of the public and the environment. So at SRS, at DHEC, we do oversight of SRS under the environmental side of our agency. Currently, we are an environmental and a public health agency. But for the SRS work, it's all handled under the environmental side, and it's through our air, water, land and waste, and Bureau of Environmental Health Services programs. We also have an Office of Ocean and Coastal Resource Management, program at DHEC, but the OCRM doesn't have any oversight of SRS since SRS is not located in the coastal community. So DHEC's environmental oversight role at SRS kind of falls under 4 different broad areas. We handle protection of the environment through our permitting programs. We do improvement of the environment through our cleanup programs. We have oversight through our environmental surveillance and oversight program, or ESOP, which you've heard a little bit about already today. And then we have an arm that deals with emergency preparedness, which is handled in our emergency response program. So before I get into all the things that DHEC does with regards to oversight, I just want to kind of make sure you're aware that there are a few things that DHEC does not do. We do not regulate the storage of spent nuclear fuel or nuclear materials. So DHEC promotes protection of human health and the environment through the enforcement of federal and state laws and regulations, and you've heard a lot about that already this morning. But EPA has delegated authority to the state for our air, water, waste, and cleanup programs. And under the permitting programs in those various program areas, we issue permits to the site that are in accordance with those federal and state laws and regulations. So the permits will generally have a 30-day public comment period attached to them. So again, an opportunity for the public to provide their input and their concerns before a permit is issued or renewed. The permit, once issued, will have monitoring and reporting requirements associated with it that SRS must meet. And then DHEC personnel will be conducting inspections periodically to ensure that the site is operating in compliance with their permit. There's also the ability for the state to take enforcement actions if and when necessary, if there are permit violations that are occurring. So here's just sort of a general grouping of a lot of the various permitting programs that we have at DHEC, and Avery covered a lot of this already, so I'm not going to go through each area, but just as a reminder, we have some very large site-wide permits. She talked about the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act permits. We also have the Resource Conservation Recovery Act hazardous waste permit, which is a large site-wide permit. And then we get down to some smaller areas, some permits that cover area-specific activities, such as underground storage tanks or solid waste permits like a landfill area. And then we get even kind of smaller, and for our cleanup programs, we issue things called monitoring well approvals, or like basically a monitoring well permit or an underground injection control permit, which would cover activities that are associated with all the things that Jeff talked about earlier, with the assessment work that we're doing to clean up the site, and also, of course, the cleanup work through injections of different amendments to reduce chemicals of concern that are at the site. So let's talk a little bit about DHEC's cleanup activities. I mentioned that we have the Resource Conservation Recovery Act permit that governs the site. So under that permit, SRS must comply with requirements for management and storage of hazardous and mixed waste at the site. The RECRA permit also requires that SRS assess and clean up all waste contaminated areas at the site. And there are modules, post-closure care modules associated with the permit that address monitoring and corrective action or cleanup requirements at the site. So we also have cleanup through our federal facility agreement program, and again, you've heard a lot about that program this morning, so I'll kind of keep this brief, but we have a federal facility agreement program at DHEC. The FFA is a 3-party agreement that was signed in 1993 and course, the three parties to the agreement are DOE, EPA, and DHEC. So that agreement outlines the various, it governs investigation and remediation of the site. It integrates the RCRA process and the CERCLA or Superfund process that John mentioned. So all the documents that are generated as a result of our investigations and cleanup, they're going to satisfy both the RCRA and CERCLA requirements. So the Federal Facility Agreement kind of integrates those two processes. It also outlines the different roles and responsibilities of the parties to the agreement. Again, it includes milestones and schedules for the work that is going to be done. And it includes provisions for penalties if needed and a dispute resolution process, again, if needed. And as John mentioned, that's not something we have to use very often at SRS, luckily. The FFA appendices, which is where the milestones that are outlined for cleanup activities, those are updated annually, and that is by three-party agreement. So John's talked about this, and Karen's talked about this core team approach that we use, and lucky for us, because of this approach, we don't go through the dispute resolution process that is outlined in the FFA very often. I would say it's a blue box, but it's not blue on the screen, but the lower level of boxes just outlines the Superfund process from preliminary characterization or assessment of an area or plume through the record of decision that John talked about. And of course, that was the document that details and commits to the site to clean up by a particular technology or technologies. The key to our core team approach is that we have frequent communication and collaboration throughout this process. So the diamonds that you see up top, here we go, just kind of outline different parts of the process where we all come together and we scope the project. And so it's not just that we might be meeting 5 times on a project. Each of those diamonds can represent multiple meetings that we have where we work through the various documents. And so we might meet, 5 times in the work plan scoping phase. And this early communication that we have, it's a very formal process. It is a consensus-based approach. So as John has mentioned, each agency designates a decision maker. So yes, we might have several people in the room, but there's one decision maker for DHEC, one decision maker for DOE, and one decision maker for EPA that are the final say on what's happening. But again, we have support through the other technical experts that are a part of each agency or part of the project team, the contractor team, that participate with us and offer suggestions and questions. And so we make sure that all of those things are addressed in our discussions. There's also still opportunity for stakeholder involvement. John mentioned the proposed plan part of the Superfund process, and that's a key part of Superfund that allows for stakeholder involvement in making remedy decisions. So we still have all these pieces. The state and EPA still maintain their regulatory authority for a project, and DOE is still going to maintain and manage the project resources that are associated with the various projects. But by getting together in a room, we are able to work through a lot of problems early, and so there aren't surprises when documents come to us. This is a very different approach than a lot of other sites use. Rather than them just sending a document to us and us reviewing it and saying, wait a minute, what about this area or this issue or this permit? We can have a discussion in a room and work through those early so that by the time we receive the document, we may still have comments, but there's no showstopper. There's nothing that is going to derail the project schedule and cost. And so we're able to keep to the schedule that we've agreed to in our FFA because we're able to get together and we communicate, we come to an agreement, and it's a three-party agreement, and then we document those decisions in our scoping summaries and in the documents themselves that are generated as part of the Superfund process. So this has been a very successful program. You heard some numbers earlier that there are 515 waste units at the Savannah River site, and there are, of those 515 waste units, over 80% of them have cleanup decisions on them. So that's a huge number, and I think that's in large part thanks to the work that we do through our core team process. So some other cleanup oversight work that we do at DHEC, we oversee the cleanup of legacy waste through the site treatment plan. The site treatment plan covers legacy, mixed, low-level, transuranic, and high-level waste. This plan was enabled by the Federal Facility Compliance Act in 1992, and it required that DOE devise a plan for developing treatment capabilities and technologies to treat mixed waste by an approved schedule, and it is enforced by a consent order. So the site treatment plan was developed in consultation with the EPA and other states that would be impacted by the plan. And it also requires state approval for any hazardous or radioactive waste shipment that is proposed to come to the site. Another area of great concern for the state of South Carolina are the high-level waste tanks. And we've talked a little bit about that this morning already, too. So Section 3116 of the National Defense Authorization Act in 2005 allowed for the Energy Secretary to determine in consultation with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that certain waste, radioactive waste resulting from the reprocessing of spent nuclear fuels is not high-level waste. And so any residuals that are remaining must be under a state-approved permit or a closure plan. And so the high-level waste tanks are regulated by South Carolina's industrial wastewater program through our Bureau of Water. And so the tanks operate under a wastewater permit, and closure is conducted under closure modules. The state, DHEC approves activities that are associated with waste removal, with stabilization, and operational closure of the tanks. There are 51 tanks at the site. They are split between 2 tank farms, F area and H area. And of the 51, we've closed 8 of them to date. So of the 43 remaining tanks, 16 are what is considered non-compliant tanks. That just means that they do not have adequate secondary containment. They don't meet those requirements. And so those 16, what we call non-compliant tanks, are also included in our federal facility agreement as milestones. And those are milestones for preliminary cease waste removal, or PCWR, which is removal of waste from the tanks. And then we have milestones for operational closure of the tanks, which means grouting the tank up so that it cannot be used again. And so we spent a good bit of time in 2022 together, DOE, EPA, DHEC, and SRMC, the liquid waste contractor, talking about the liquid waste program and coming up with a plan to get those non-compliant tanks closed out on a schedule. And so that is the 2037 date that Phyllis mentioned earlier is for completion of the liquid waste mission. So that's when those 16 non-compliant tanks, and actually all of the high-level waste tanks, even the ones that are not part of our FFA requirements, will be closed out. That was a very successful discussion that we had back in 2022, and The first milestone that is part of the FFA for that effort is the preliminary cease waste removal milestone that is at the end of 2024. And we talked a little bit about that yesterday in the updates. The first tank that we think will achieve preliminary cease waste removal is tank 10, and DOE has briefed us on that. And so they should be meeting that milestone well ahead of the end of 2024 schedule. So just to round out the high-level waste tanks and the liquid waste system, DHEC also has permits for some other areas that are associated, other facilities that are associated with the liquid waste system. We oversee Bureau of Water permits for the salt waste processing facility and the defense waste processing facility. We also have a solid waste permit, which is a Class 3 landfill, for the saltstone disposal facility, which is where the low-level waste is grouted up on site. So our oversight role, in addition to the site visits that we conduct as part of our permit inspections and site visits that we conduct for oversight of cleanup activities, we also have a group at DHEC that is dedicated to monitoring Savannah Riverside and the surrounding areas to determine impacts of site activities on the environment. And that is handled by our Aiken District Office and their Environmental Surveillance and Oversight Program, or ESOP, that you've already heard a little bit about. So the ESOP program has staff that goes out frequently and collects samples from a variety of environmental media, from air and water and soil and sediment to fish and game animals as well. And so all of the data that's collected through their efforts is evaluated, and an annual report is written documenting their findings. That is what you see here on this slide. This is the cover of the 2022 data report, which is the most recent report that we have available for you to review. You can go to our website, the link on the slide, and pull up that report. We also have older previous reports available if you're interested in comparing from year to year how things have changed or have not changed at the site or around the area. But this report, again, is independent verification of the work that are the impacts that SRS activities have. So this is, I think, complementary to the work that the site does for their annual site environmental report, or ACER report. And we'll be giving a more in-depth update on all the ESOP activities later in the fall once that new report comes out. So just a little note, you might be wondering why 2022 is our latest report. It takes a while because we're collecting data all year long. So right now, for instance, we're collecting data for 2024, and then it takes time to review all of the data and put together the narrative to describe what those findings are. So there will always be a little bit of a lag, basically, between when the data is collected and when the information is reported out. All right, so our final kind of area of oversight at SRS is through our emergency preparedness activities. Just in general, South Carolina has a comprehensive emergency operations plan for disasters, whether they may be natural disasters like hurricanes and earthquakes and tornadoes, that kind of thing, or man-made disasters like terrorism. So we have that, but we also maintain extra efforts for activities that are related to Savannah Riverside. So we have an emergency response group that meets quarterly. They hold practice drills that are specifically geared toward Savannah Riverside activities, so that, you know, if a disaster occurs, we're able to respond immediately and appropriately to that disaster. So just, you know, summing up, DHEC is committed to its cleanup programs, its oversight programs, permitting programs, and so forth that I've mentioned in an effort to protect and promote human health and the environment. So you may have heard that we are no longer going to be DHEC in a few months. I think I've mentioned that at some of the previous cabs, but for those of you who may be new to the cab or haven't heard, the Department of Health and Environmental Control will no longer exist on July 1st of 2024. Instead, we will be restructured into two new agencies, the Department of Environmental Services, or DES, and the Department of Public Health. All of the things I talked about this morning are all environmental programs, and they will all become part of the new Department of Environmental Services. So fear not, we will keep doing what we've been doing. All of the programs I mentioned are moving over there, where there are no plans to change our oversight role of SRS. So the only difference is I'll have to remember to say I'm with Department of Environmental Services. I'll have a new email address, which of course we'll send out to everyone. We'll have a beautiful new logo. But otherwise, things will be moving as they have been. If you have questions about DHEC's restructuring, whether it's related to the environmental programs or the public health programs, you can go to the website on this slide, and it will talk about the restructuring process and answer questions that you may have. So with that, I will take questions. Either I did a great job or you're all really hungry.
Any questions for Phyllis?
I just have a quick question. Phyllis Britt, Cab. To John and Susan, has there ever been an occasion when y'all could not agree?
Yes.
And what did you do about that?
So, okay, so there are different levels of disagreement, right? We've had disagreements in core team meetings, and sometimes we just take a step back and maybe we ask the project team to get additional information, and then we reconvene and try to address what the issue is. So those would be I would say, the easy things, and then we resolve them. We have gone to dispute, and that's been for the high-level waste tanks. South Carolina considers the high-level waste tanks the greatest environmental risk in the state. And so, there was a schedule before 2022 that DOE had to meet for the FFA. And because of delays in getting some of the facilities, the liquid waste facilities like the salt waste processing facility up and running, that jeopardized them being able to achieve the milestones that were outlined in the FFA. And so, because it's a high risk, we would push them to figure it out. We don't want to move a milestone. We want to keep the milestone. We want to keep the pressure on because we want this risk reduced. But having said that, we also understand that you can't reduce risk without having the facilities in operation. And so we took a time out, I think 2017, 18 timeframe? 19? Okay. And that was the suspension agreement, and it's part of the record of the federal facility agreement, so you can go and look at the history of all of the changes we've made to the high-level waste milestones. But we basically suspended the project, or those milestones, in exchange for other risk reduction activities at the site. So we didn't let DOE off the hook 100%. We understand that there were some things that had, that prohibited them from getting the liquid waste cleaned up as quickly as we would have liked, but it committed them to some other cleanup activities while they were working out those other issues.
And that's what made our upper management very happy, because they, D area, got a lot of those things that we were planning to do 6 or 8 years in the future as scheduled. And a lot of those soil and groundwater projects got moved up during that time when we had the suspension of the tanks. So that was, to our upper management, Superfund director and up, a win-win.
Gotcha. Okay. Super. Thank you.
Okay. Candace?
Candace Cave Cab. So in this process, DHEC represents, I guess, the state of South Carolina. Does DHEC have an official stance on the situation with the delay of the federal repository?
No, DHEC does not have an official stance.
Good
We would
answer.
love for a federal repository to be established, right? Because there is some high-level waste in those glass logs that needs to be disposed of.
Any other questions, comments from around the table? Either from this or any of our other presentations from this morning? And now I'm going to ask across our panel, if you have any closing comments, anything that you want to add, anything that's come up, I want to give you the opportunity to say anything. Everybody's really hungry, got it. All right. Can we give our presenters a round of applause, please? It takes a lot of energy and effort to sit up here for the front of the room for the past couple of hours. I really sincerely appreciate you all doing it. Thank you. Okay, we are at 12:56. That's close enough to 1 o'clock that we're going to round up. Getting a meal fast in this town is difficult, so I'm still going to give you the hour and a half. So 1 to 2, 2:30, you need to be back in your seats. If we look out in the room and you're all back here well before then, we're going to start. So there's an incentive to rush to the best you can, okay? But at the very latest, don't be later than 2:30 because we will start without you. Thank you.
I'm going next door to his. It's like a.